If you have been trading for any amount of time, you already know this feeling. You enter a trade with confidence. You've studied the chart. You've waited patiently. You've told yourself, this one makes sense. And for a moment, you feel certain. You feel aligned. You feel like you finally understand what the market is about to do. And then it moves against you. At first, it's small, just a little pullback. You tell yourself it's normal. Then it keeps going. Now your heart rate changes. You start watching every tick. You start thinking, maybe you were early. Maybe you misread it. Maybe it will come back. And somewhere in that moment, the stop loss you placed doesn't feel like protection anymore. It feels like an enemy. It feels like something that will take your money away if you let it. So you move it, or you remove it, or you never placed it in the first place because you didn't want to be wrong. This is where most traders quietly destroy themselves. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack strategy, but because they misunderstand one simple truth. Trading is not about certainty, it is about probability. And the stop-loss rule that saves and grows accounts is born from that truth. You see, most traders believe that if they study hard enough, if they refine their entries enough, if they wait for the perfect setup, they can eliminate losing trades. They chase the illusion of predictability. They want to know what will happen next. But the market does not reward the need to know. Every trade you take exists inside a random distribution of outcomes. Even the best edge in the world will produce losses. Not occasionally, not rarely, regularly. This is not a flaw. It is the structure of the game. When you expect every trade to win, you are fighting the structure. You are fighting probability itself. And that fight will drain your account and your confidence. The stop loss is not there because your analysis is weak. It is there because uncertainty is permanent. If you truly understand this, something shifts inside you. You stop trying to avoid losses. You start trying to control risk. You stop trying to be right. You start trying to be consistent. You stop seeing a stopped-out trade as failure. You start seeing it as one event in a long series of events. But until you embrace that every outcome is uncertain, the stop loss will feel like punishment instead of protection. And when something feels like punishment, you resist it. You widen it, you ignore it, you delay it, you tell yourself, it will come back. That sentence has probably cost you more money than any strategy ever has. Because what you are really saying when you refuse to accept the stop is this: I cannot emotionally tolerate being wrong. And that is not a market problem, that is a certainty problem. The stop-loss rule that saves and grows accounts begins with this acceptance. You do not control outcomes, you control risk. Once that mental fog begins to clear, you start seeing something powerful. Losses are not personal, they are structural. They are built into the distribution of your edge. If you take one trade in isolation, it feels heavy. It feels meaningful. It feels like a verdict on your ability. But if you zoom out and look at 100 trades taken with consistent risk and consistent rules, something else appears. Patterns, stability, statistical rhythm. Your stop loss is what makes that rhythm possible. Without it, one trade can distort the entire distribution. Without it, one emotional decision can erase months of disciplined execution. Without it, probability cannot work for you because you have allowed a single outcome to dominate the series. This is the first myth you must break. The belief that your job is to avoid losing trades. Your job is to define risk so precisely that no single loss can threaten your future. Now let's go deeper, because understanding this intellectually is easy. Living it in real time is something else entirely. When price starts moving toward your stop, something happens in your body. Your stomach tightens, your breathing changes, your mind starts bargaining. You begin to search for reasons to justify staying in. You zoom into smaller time frames. You find patterns that confirm your hope. You tell yourself, it's just noise. This is not logic. This is fear of uncertainty. You are trying to escape the emotional discomfort of accepting risk. Greed plays a role too. When a trade moves in your favor, you feel powerful. You start calculating what it would mean if it goes further. You imagine doubling your account. You imagine telling people you finally figured it out. And when that same trade pulls back toward your stop, greed turns into denial. You don't want to give back the profit. You don't want the dream to shrink. So you widen the stop. You say it's strategic. But if you're honest, it's emotional. Overconfidence does the same thing in a different form. After a few winners, you start believing you see something others don't. You reduce your caution, you increase your size. You think, I've got this. And when that larger position moves against you, the pain is amplified. Now the stop feels unbearable because the loss feels larger than it should have been. These distortions are subtle. They don't announce themselves. They whisper. They whisper that this trade is different, that this time you can bend the rule, that this loss doesn't count. And each time you listen, you erode your edge. The way out is not more analysis, it is awareness. When you feel that knot in your stomach as price approaches your stop, instead of reacting, observe it. Notice the urge to interfere. Notice the story your mind is creating. And remind yourself of something simple. This is one event in a long series. If your edge truly has a positive expectancy over many trades, then any single trade is irrelevant. But this only becomes real when your stop loss is non-negotiable. Non-negotiable does not mean rigid in placement. It means rigid in execution. You can refine where you place it based on your rules, but once placed, it is final. It is the line that defines your risk before the trade even begins. This is where discipline turns into structure. You craft your edge not just through entries, but through rules that protect you from yourself. You write them down. You define exactly how much of your account you are willing to risk on any single trade. Not based on how confident you feel, not based on how much you want to make, but based on what allows you to survive a string of losses without emotional collapse. You build routines around this. Before every trade you ask, have I defined my stop? Does this loss, if taken, fall within my predetermined risk? Am I emotionally neutral about this outcome? If the answer is no, you do not enter. This may feel slow, it may feel restrictive, but this is what transforms trading from gambling into a probability game. Your why becomes important here. Why are you trading? Is it to feel right? To prove something? To escape financial pressure instantly? Or is it to build consistent growth over time? If your why is urgent, emotional, desperate, your stop loss will always feel too tight because every trade will feel like it must succeed. But if your why is long-term, process-driven, steady, then the stop becomes your ally. It protects your capital so that you can continue playing the game tomorrow. And that is the real goal. Accepting risk fully is the foundation of this transformation. Most traders say they accept risk, but they don't. If you truly accept risk, you are at peace with the possibility that the trade will hit your stop before you click the button. You are not surprised if it happens. You are not angry. You are not shaken. You already decided that this amount of money is the cost of doing business. Think about that carefully. When you buy groceries, you expect to pay. When you fuel your car, you expect to pay. But in trading, you expect not to pay. Losses are the operating cost of this business. Position sizing is where this becomes practical. If your risk per trade is so large that 3 losses in a row make you anxious, then your size is wrong. Not because the market is unfair, but because your emotional tolerance has been exceeded. Small, consistent risk allows you to think clearly. It allows you to place your stop in a logical location instead of an emotional one. It allows you to survive drawdowns without panic, and survival is underrated. Scaling in and out can also support this mindset, but only if done within predefined rules, not as a reaction to fear or greed, not as a way to avoid accepting a loss, but as part of your structure. Your capital is not a weapon to fire recklessly. It is a tool to deploy repeatedly across many trades. When you start treating it this way, something changes. You stop chasing, you stop forcing, you execute, and even then, you will make mistakes. You will move a stop one day, you will hesitate another day, you will close early out of fear. But instead of judging yourself, you review, not the outcome, the process. Did I follow my rules? Did I accept risk fully? Was my stop defined before entry? If the trade lost but you followed your rules, that is success. If the trade won but you violated your stop rule, that is failure. This distinction is powerful. It shifts your focus from being right to being consistent. Over time, you begin to see losses differently. They lose their sting. They become data. You record them. You analyze patterns in your behavior. You notice when you tend to interfere. You adjust your routines. You build resilience not by avoiding mistakes, but by extracting lessons without self-judgment. And as this continues, something subtle happens. You enter trades without tension. You place your stop without fear. You watch price move without needing to control it. You operate in harmony with uncertainty instead of fighting it. Drawdowns still occur. They always will, but they no longer define you because your account is structured to withstand them, because your stop-loss rule ensures that no single trade can threaten your stability, because you understand that growth comes from repetition, not perfection. This is how accounts grow, not through one big win, but through dozens and hundreds of disciplined executions where risk is controlled, losses are accepted, and probability is allowed to unfold. And as months pass, you realize something even deeper. The stop-loss was never just about protecting money. It was about protecting your mind. It created boundaries that allowed you to stay objective. It prevented emotional spirals that lead to revenge trading. It preserved your confidence by keeping losses small and manageable. The trader you become through this process is calm, measured, detached from the need to predict, committed to the process. You no longer ask, will this trade win? You ask, does this trade meet my rules? You no longer fear the stop. You respect it because you understand that every time it is hit, it has done its job. It has kept you in the game. And staying in the game long enough for probability to work in your favor is what creates lasting success. When you internalize this fully, you stop trying to outsmart uncertainty. You accept it. You define your risk. You execute consistently. You review without judgment. You repeat. And in that repetition, your account grows. But more importantly, you grow. You become someone who can face uncertainty without flinching. Someone who can take a loss without collapsing emotionally. Someone who understands that control in trading does not come from predicting outcomes, but from defining risk. The stop-loss rule that saves and grows accounts is simple, but it requires courage. Courage to accept you don't know. Courage to be wrong repeatedly without losing confidence. Courage to trust probability over emotion. If you can do that, if you can place your stop before entry, define your risk clearly, and never violate it, you give yourself something most traders never achieve: stability. And from stability, growth becomes natural. Not forced, not desperate, not dramatic. Steady, quiet, compounding. And over time, you realize that the real victory was never about avoiding losses. It was about becoming the kind of trader who can accept them fully and continue executing anyway. That is the trader who survives. That is the trader who grows. That is the trader you are capable of becoming. And when you truly begin to live this way, something unexpected happens. The fear that once dominated your decisions starts to fade. Not because the market changed, not because losses disappeared, but because you are no longer fighting reality. You see, the stop-loss rule is not just a line on a chart. It is a decision made in advance. It is a declaration that says, this is how much uncertainty I'm willing to tolerate on this idea. And when that decision is made calmly, before emotion enters the picture, it becomes powerful. Most traders decide their risk after they are already in the trade. That is the silent mistake. They enter based on hope or excitement. They watch the market move. And only when it starts going against them do they ask, where should I get out? By then, the answer is contaminated. It is influenced by fear, by ego, by the desire to avoid pain. That is why the rule must exist before the trade. Before you click the button, you already know exactly where you are wrong, not because you are predicting the future, but because you are defining the boundary of your idea. If price reaches that point, your premise is no longer valid, and you exit without argument. When you operate like this, you stop negotiating with the market. You stop trying to convince it to agree with you. You allow it to do whatever it will do, and you respond based on rules. This is emotional maturity in trading. You've felt the opposite before. You've felt the urge to widen a stop because it's just a little more. You've felt the temptation to remove it entirely because this can't be wrong. You've felt the anger when price hits your stop and then immediately moves in your original direction. And that anger is revealing. It reveals that you were attached to being right. It reveals that you expected certainty. But remember this, the market does not owe you a clean move. It does not owe you respect. It does not owe you fairness. If your edge is real, over a large sample of trades, it will express itself. But individual outcomes will often feel random. Sometimes you will be stopped out by a small movement and then watch price move exactly where you anticipated. That does not mean your stop was wrong. It means you encountered variance. If you respond to variance by breaking your rule, you destroy the very structure that allows your edge to function. Think about this deeply. If you take 20 trades with consistent risk and consistent stops, and 10 win while 10 lose, but your winners are larger than your losers, you grow. But if you allow one losing trade to expand beyond your predefined risk because you felt sure, you distort the math. You turn a manageable loss into a damaging event. And the damage is not just financial, it is psychological. Large losses create hesitation, they create doubt, they make you question your system, they make you fear the next trade. Small, consistent losses, on the other hand, preserve clarity. They keep your confidence intact because you know you followed your rule. This is where most traders misunderstand growth. They think growth comes from increasing position size aggressively, from finding bigger moves, from holding longer. But real growth begins with consistency of risk. If you cannot risk the same small percentage of your account over and over without emotional turbulence, increasing size will only magnify instability. Your first objective is not to make more money. It is to become emotionally stable under risk. That stability comes from knowing without hesitation that no single trade can hurt you beyond what you have already accepted. When you internalize this, you begin to experience a kind of quiet freedom. You enter trades without tension. You place stops without fear. You let outcomes unfold without needing to interfere. You understand that your job is execution, not prediction. And something subtle but powerful begins to happen. You stop watching every tick. You stop reacting to every small fluctuation. You stop trying to control what cannot be controlled. Instead, you shift your attention to what is fully within your control. Your preparation, your position size, your stop placement, your rule adherence. This shift transforms your relationship with the market. You are no longer trying to conquer it. You are participating in it with structure. Now, let's talk about something deeper. The stop-loss rule does not just protect your account, it protects your identity. When traders do not define risk properly, they often tie their self-worth to individual trades. A losing trade feels like personal failure. A winning trade feels like validation. This emotional swing creates instability. If you need the market to validate you, you will resist taking losses. But if you see yourself as a risk manager rather than a predictor, everything changes. Your success is no longer defined by whether the trade wins. It is defined by whether you executed your plan flawlessly. This redefinition is liberating. It gives you something solid to stand on, even during losing streaks. And losing streaks will come, even with a strong edge, even with discipline, even with perfect execution. There will be periods where you take 5, 6, maybe even 10 losses in a row. If your risk per trade is small and predefined, this becomes survivable. If it is large and emotional, it becomes devastating. The stop-loss rule that saves and grows accounts is built for these moments. It is built for the times when probability clusters against you. It is built to keep you steady when outcomes feel unfair. And it is during these periods that your mindset is truly tested. You may start questioning your system. You may feel the urge to change rules midstream. You may think, maybe I need to move stops further. Maybe I need to risk more to recover. These thoughts are natural, but they are dangerous because they are reactions to short-term variance. If your edge was tested over a meaningful sample of trades and proven positive, then abandoning it during a drawdown is self-sabotage. This is where faith and probability matters. Not blind faith, but trust built from evidence. You must know your system deeply enough to understand its normal fluctuations. You must know what kind of drawdown is statistically possible. You must be prepared for it emotionally before it happens. Preparation removes shock. Shock creates emotional decisions. When you know that 10 losses in a row are possible, and you have sized your risk accordingly, those losses do not destroy you. They become part of the plan. And when the winners return, they restore balance. But only if you are still executing. If you allowed a single large loss to break your discipline, you may not be there to experience the recovery. This is why the stop-loss rule is sacred. It preserves your presence in the game. And trading is a game of presence over time. The longer you remain consistent, the more probability works in your favor. The shorter your participation due to emotional blow-ups, the less chance your edge has to express itself. Over time, you begin to notice something remarkable. The urge to interfere weakens. The emotional intensity of each trade decreases. You start seeing trades as routine events rather than dramatic battles. You place a trade, you define risk, you walk away. If it hits the stop, you record it and move on. If it reaches your target, you record it and move on. There is no celebration, no despair, just execution. And in that neutrality, your growth accelerates. Because emotional energy is no longer being wasted. You are not drained by every fluctuation. You are not riding emotional highs and lows. You are steady, and steady compounds. This is what most people do not see when they look at successful traders. They see the account growth, they see the profits. They do not see the emotional discipline behind it. They do not see the hundreds of small losses taken without hesitation. They do not see the strict adherence to predefined stops. But that is the foundation. Without it, growth collapses under pressure. With it, growth becomes sustainable. As you continue to apply this rule, you begin to trust yourself more. Not because every trade wins, but because you know you will not betray your own rules. Self-trust is built through consistency. Every time you honor your stop, even when it hurts, you strengthen that trust. Every time you violate it, you weaken it. This is not about being perfect. It is about being committed. And over months and years, that commitment shapes your identity. You are no longer the trader who hopes. You are no longer the trader who panics. You are the trader who defines risk, executes, and accepts outcomes. You understand that the market's randomness is not your enemy. It is the environment in which your discipline thrives. And eventually, you realize something profound. The stop-loss rule was never restrictive. It was freeing. It freed you from catastrophic losses. It freed you from emotional spirals. It freed you from the illusion that you must be right. It allowed you to participate in uncertainty with confidence. Confidence not in prediction, but in process. And when your confidence rests on process, not outcome, you become unshakable. Losses still occur. Drawdowns still happen. But they no longer threaten your identity. They are temporary fluctuations within a structured framework. This is how accounts grow quietly over time. Through repetition, through small, controlled risk, through unwavering respect for the stop-loss. And as your account grows, something even more valuable grows with it. Your mental freedom. You stop obsessing. You stop chasing. You stop trying to force trades. You wait for your criteria. You define your risk. You execute calmly, and you repeat. This rhythm becomes natural. It becomes almost boring. And that boredom is a sign of mastery, because the drama is gone. The desperation is gone. The need to prove something is gone. What remains is discipline, clarity, and steady progress. The trader who lives by this stop-loss rule does not fear uncertainty. He or she welcomes it, because within that uncertainty lies opportunity. Not guaranteed opportunity, but statistical opportunity. And statistics only work when you protect yourself from extreme outcomes. That is the power of the stop-loss rule. It caps the downside. It allows the upside to express over time. It keeps you in the game long enough for compounding to do its quiet work. And the longer you stay disciplined, the more natural it feels. The more natural it feels, the less effort it requires. And the less effort it requires, the more sustainable your growth becomes. Eventually, you look back and realize that the biggest change was not in your strategy. It was in your mindset. You no longer fear being wrong. You no longer need to avoid losses. You no longer see stops as enemies. You see them as structure. And structure is what transforms chaos into opportunity. The market remains uncertain. That never changes. But you become steady within that uncertainty. And that steadiness is what saves and grows accounts. Not brilliance, not prediction, not luck. Steadiness, defined risk, unbroken rules, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can take a loss today and still show up tomorrow without hesitation. That is the kind of trader who lasts. That is the kind of trader who compounds. That is the kind of trader the stop-loss rule is designed to create. Now let's go even deeper, because there is a layer most traders never confront. You can understand stop-loss rules. You can even follow them for a while. But if you have not truly accepted uncertainty at a personal level, the rule will eventually break under pressure. And pressure always comes. There will be a trade that looks perfect. Everything aligns. Your confidence is high. You've waited patiently. You feel calm. You risk your predefined amount, and then price moves directly to your stop with almost no hesitation. You feel it immediately. A slight sting, a small voice that says, "That shouldn't have happened." That sentence reveals everything. It reveals that somewhere you still expected certainty. Because if you fully accept uncertainty, nothing should happen. There is only what does happen. This is where emotional maturity separates you from the crowd. When a trade hits your stop, can you truly feel neutral? Not suppressing frustration, not pretending to be detached, but genuinely calm because you already accepted this outcome before entering. If you cannot, that's not failure. It's awareness. And awareness is the beginning of transformation. The stop-loss rule that saves and grows accounts is not mechanical. It is psychological. It forces you to confront your relationship with being wrong. Most people grow up associating being wrong with embarrassment, criticism, or punishment. So when a trade hits your stop, it triggers something deeper than money. It triggers identity. But trading does not punish you for being wrong. It only reflects probabilities. If you can separate identity from outcome, everything changes. You are not wrong. Your trade idea simply did not play out this time. That distinction may sound small. It is not. It allows you to take 10 losses in a row and still remain stable. Because you do not see those losses as personal failures. You see them as business expenses. And here is something powerful. When you genuinely accept that any trade can lose, you stop trying to manipulate outcomes. You stop moving stops to avoid discomfort. You stop closing early out of fear. You stop doubling size to recover quickly. Your actions become clean. Clean execution creates clean data. Clean data builds confidence. Confidence reduces emotional interference. And that cycle reinforces itself. Now consider the opposite. When you violate your stop-loss rule, what happens internally? Even if the trade eventually wins, you feel something. A subtle loss of self-respect. You broke your rule. You reacted emotionally. And even if you made money, something inside you becomes unstable. Because now you've proven to yourself that rules are flexible under pressure. And if they're flexible once, they will be flexible again. Eventually, that flexibility leads to one large loss. That large loss damages not only your account, but your trust in yourself. You begin hesitating. You second-guess entries. You fear the next stop-out. All because one rule was broken. This is why consistency matters more than brilliance. Consistency builds internal stability. Internal stability builds long-term growth. The stop-loss rule is the anchor of that consistency. Let's talk about drawdowns. Drawdowns are inevitable. Even with perfect discipline, even with a strong edge, there will be periods where nothing works. This is where most traders unravel. Not because their system stopped working, but because their expectations were unrealistic. If you expect steady upward growth every week, drawdowns feel like catastrophe. If you understand that equity curves naturally fluctuate, drawdowns feel temporary. Your stop-loss rule ensures that drawdowns remain controlled. It prevents them from spiraling into destruction. But surviving a drawdown requires more than mechanical stops. It requires mental steadiness. During a losing streak, your mind will look for solutions. It will suggest changing rules, taking fewer trades, taking more trades, increasing size to recover faster, widening stops to avoid repeated small losses. These ideas feel logical in the moment, but they are reactions to emotional discomfort. If your edge was defined and tested properly, the correct response to a drawdown is continued disciplined execution. Nothing dramatic, nothing reactive, just steady repetition. And here's something most people overlook. When you risk a small, consistent percentage per trade, you reduce the emotional weight of a drawdown. 5 losses at 1% risk each feels very different from 5 losses at 5% each. One scenario preserves clarity. The other creates panic. Panic leads to impulsive decisions. Impulsive decisions break rules. Broken rules create large losses. Large losses create fear. Fear creates hesitation, and the cycle continues. The stop-loss rule is not only about limiting individual trades. It is about preventing destructive cycles Now imagine this instead. You risk 1% per trade. You hit a series of losses. Your account dips slightly, but you remain calm because you expected this possibility. You continue executing. Eventually, the winners return. Your account recovers gradually. Your confidence remains intact because you never broke your structure. This is quiet resilience. This is how accounts grow steadily, not through emotional heroics, not through dramatic recoveries, through discipline. Over time, you begin to trust probability at a deeper level. You no longer feel urgent. You no longer feel desperate. You understand that growth is a function of repetition under control. And something beautiful happens. You start preserving mental energy. Most traders are exhausted not from trading itself, but from emotional turbulence, from obsessing over every tick, from fearing every stop, from celebrating every win too intensely, from panicking during losses. When you follow a strict stop-loss rule and predefined risk, trading becomes lighter. You make decisions once, before the trade. After that, you simply observe. Observation requires far less emotional energy than constant interference. Preserved mental energy allows you to stay consistent longer. Consistency over time allows compounding to work. Compounding is subtle. It does not explode overnight. It builds quietly, and it only works when capital is preserved. Capital preservation is impossible without stop discipline. Now think about who you are becoming in this process. You are becoming someone who can sit with uncertainty without needing control. Someone who can accept small losses without reacting. Someone who understands that long-term growth comes from structure, not emotion. This identity shift is more valuable than any single winning trade. Because once you become this kind of trader, your growth becomes sustainable. You are no longer fragile. You are adaptable. The market will change. Conditions will shift. Volatility will expand and contract. But your rule remains steady. Define risk. Place stop before entry. Never violate it. Review process, not outcome. Repeat. And with each repetition, your internal stability strengthens. There will still be moments of temptation. A trade that moves quickly in your favor will tempt you to remove targets and risk more. A trade that moves quickly against you will tempt you to widen stops. But now, you recognize these impulses as emotional noise. You see them clearly, and seeing them clearly reduces their power. You begin to smile slightly when you notice the urge, because you understand what it is. It is the old desire for certainty trying to resurface, and you gently return to your rule. This is mastery, not perfection, not flawless execution every single time, but rapid recovery when you slip. If you ever break your stop-loss rule, the most important thing is not self-punishment. It is immediate awareness and correction. You review what triggered the violation. Was it fear? Was it greed? Was it frustration from previous losses? You adjust your routine to prevent repetition. Maybe you step away after 2 consecutive losses. Maybe you reduce size temporarily during emotional periods. Maybe you write a reminder on your desk, stops are final. You build safeguards around your psychology because discipline is easier when supported by structure. Over months and years, these safeguards become habits. Habits reduce decision fatigue. Reduced fatigue preserves clarity. Clarity sustains performance. And sustained performance grows accounts. Eventually, trading feels different. There is less drama, less urgency, less emotional volatility. You are not trying to prove anything anymore. You are not chasing the next big win. You are executing a process. Your account begins to reflect that steadiness. Growth may not be explosive, but it is durable. Durable growth is what creates freedom. Not just financial freedom, mental freedom. You no longer wake up anxious about trades. You no longer obsess over every position. You trust your structure, and that trust allows you to live, to think clearly, to operate calmly. This is the deeper reward of the stop-loss rule. It transforms you from someone reacting to the market into someone operating within it. You stop fighting randomness. You work with it. You understand that uncertainty is not an obstacle. It is the foundation, because without uncertainty, there would be no opportunity. Without risk, there would be no reward. And without a stop-loss rule, risk becomes undefined. Undefined risk is chaos. Defined risk is freedom. When you define risk precisely, you gain control over the only variable you truly possess. Not the outcome, not the direction, but the amount you are willing to lose. And that control is enough. Enough to survive, enough to grow, enough to compound over time. The trader who survives long enough with discipline eventually experiences the power of probability. Wins begin to outweigh losses not because losses disappear, but because losses were kept small. The equity curve rises gradually because the downside was controlled. And when you look back after years of disciplined execution, you realize something profound. The stop-loss rule did more than save your account. It shaped your character. It taught you patience. It taught you humility. It taught you emotional control. It taught you respect for uncertainty. And those traits extend beyond trading. They change how you approach decisions in life. You become measured, deliberate, resilient, all because you learn to accept small losses without emotional collapse. This is why the stop-loss rule is not optional. It is foundational. It is the boundary that separates disciplined traders from emotional gamblers. It is the structure that allows probability to express itself. It is the quiet guardian of your capital and your mindset. And when you fully embrace it, when you no longer negotiate with it, when you no longer fear it, you step into a new level of trading. A level where uncertainty does not threaten you, where losses do not define you, where growth becomes steady and sustainable. You become the trader who defines risk before every decision, who accepts that any trade can lose, who never allows a single outcome to dictate emotional state, who trusts repetition over impulse. And in that steadiness, your account grows. But more importantly, you grow into someone calm under pressure, someone patient in uncertainty, someone disciplined enough to let probability do its work. That is the true power of the stop-loss rule. It does not just save accounts, it builds traders who are strong enough to sustain success for a lifetime.